Mercedes may have just been caught using a secret engine trick that's invisible to FIA tests but explosive on track. How can an engine be 100% legal on paper and still trigger a full-blown investigation before the season even starts? You're about to uncover the hidden data, the political fallout, and the one silent rule Mercedes may have just flipped upside down. And if what's being whispered behind closed doors is even half true, this could make 2014 look like a fair fight. When Mercedes first rolled their 2026 engine onto the FIA's dyno bench, everything looked normal. Compression ratios were within limits. Fuel flow rates were clean. The combustion cycle passed every regulation in the book. But something didn't add up, because once the engine hit full temperature on track, it started producing more power than anyone could explain. That's when the whispers began. What if Mercedes had found a way to manipulate compression not through software or fuel, but through physics? That's the core of the FIA's investigation, a hidden performance boost that only activates when the engine is hot. And because the FIA measures compression at ambient temperature, there's no way to detect it unless you're specifically looking for it. According to internal leaks, the team at Brixworth designed combustion components, pistons, connecting rods, even chamber linings using ultra-precise alloys with thermal expansion properties. As the engine heats up during race conditions, these components subtly reshape the combustion volume, effectively raising the compression ratio from 16:1 to nearly 18:1. That change doesn't sound huge, but in F1 terms, it's massive. It could be worth up to 20 horsepower. That's 3/10 a lap. And in a season where every manufacturer is struggling with new electric-to-combustion energy splits, those 3/10? That's race-winning pace. Legal on paper. Untouchable on track. So why is the FIA stepping in now? Because Ferrari, Audi, and Honda have been poring over simulation data. They know what kind of power output is possible under the new rules, and what Mercedes is showing doesn't match. It's not just strong. It's suspiciously efficient. So they've filed formal requests for clarification, demanding the FIA address what's now being called the thermal expansion loophole. And here's the kicker, the FIA doesn't have a clear answer. Because the rulebook never anticipated this. It wasn't written to account for component behavior at race temperature. Which means Mercedes might have just found the most devastating kind of advantage, the kind no one thought to ban. But that opens a whole new question: what happens now that everyone knows? The FIA now finds itself trapped in the middle of a regulatory minefield. If they ban the Mercedes system now, they'll be accused of retroactively punishing innovation. But if they allow it to stand, they risk unleashing a full-scale development war where every team scrambles to copy a design that only one engine department had the foresight, funding, and technical firepower to pull off. It's not just about power. It's about timing. We're less than 2 months from engine homologation. If the FIA rewrites how compression is measured at this late stage, it could force Mercedes to redesign critical internal components, pistons, chambers, alloy blends under a time crunch that no team, not even Brackley, can absorb without consequences. That would throw their entire integration schedule into chaos. And if they don't change the rule? Then Ferrari, Audi, and Red Bull are left behind with no legal path to catch up. And that's where things get ugly. Because this isn't just technical, it's deeply political. According to insiders, multiple rival teams have privately threatened to file formal protests at the very first race if Mercedes shows up with this system intact. That would drag the FIA into a public confrontation they desperately want to avoid. It's one thing to handle a gray area in private. It's another to face a rules crisis under the lights in Bahrain. Let's not forget what's at stake for Mercedes. They've designed their entire 2026 car chassis layout, cooling system, packaging geometry around this combustion concept. If it's suddenly deemed non-compliant, they don't just lose a trick. They lose the foundation of their power unit strategy. And with Lewis Hamilton now at Ferrari, it's up to George Russell and rookie Kimi Antonelli to carry the weight of this technical gamble. So the FIA is stalling. They haven't issued a technical directive yet, but they're reviewing internal data. Quiet meetings are taking place between engineers, legal teams, and political liaisons. And until something concrete emerges, the sport sits in limbo. Here's the risk no one's talking about. If Mercedes is allowed to run with this advantage untouched and starts the season dominating, the perception of fairness takes a hit. The FIA may technically be right, but in Formula One, optics are everything. Once the fans think the game is rigged, the narrative writes itself. And no amount of legality will change that. So the clock is ticking. Will the FIA make a ruling before preseason testing? Or are we heading into another season-opening scandal where the real fight isn't on track, but in the steward's office? Now imagine it's race week in Bahrain. The paddock is tense. Mercedes unloads their 2026 car engine untouched, thermally enhanced components in place. They go fastest in FP1. Then again in FP2. By Saturday, George Russell sticks it on pole by half a second. Kimi Antonelli, the rookie, is third. And just like that, every rival team knows, the loophole works. What happens next? If the FIA hasn't acted by then, the protests will fly. Ferrari, Red Bull, and Audi won't sit quietly. They'll file formal challenges before the race even begins, dragging the FIA into a political firestorm live on international broadcast. The headlines won't be about lap times, they'll be about legality, about fairness, and about whether Formula One has just repeated the mistake of 2014, when Mercedes caught everyone off guard with a turbo layout no one could match for years. The pressure on the FIA would be enormous. If they back Mercedes, they risk alienating every other manufacturer. If they rule against them mid-weekend, they risk destroying trust in the regulatory process. Either way, someone's season is over before a single point is scored. And let's not forget the drivers. How do you mentally prepare for a race knowing your car might be ruled illegal after the checkered flag? How does that affect Antonelli, in his debut race, facing not just 19 other drivers but the full political weight of the paddock? How does Russell lead the team knowing every result could come with an asterisk? This isn't just a technical battle. It's a psychological war. And if Mercedes is forced to change components after Bahrain, it won't just be a performance loss. It could unravel their entire campaign both technically and emotionally. We've seen this kind of tension before. Remember 2019? Ferrari's fuel flow controversy simmered for months before the FIA finally stepped in with a private settlement. The damage was done. The sport's credibility took a hit it still hasn't fully recovered from. Now in 2026, we may be watching history repeat itself, only this time, the numbers don't lie. Mercedes is fast. Too fast. And everyone knows why. So here's the brutal truth. The FIA has days, not weeks, to decide the future of the season. Because once the cars roll onto the grid in Bahrain, the championship narrative will already be set. The only question left is whether the stopwatch or the stewards will decide it. If Mercedes pulls this off, if they race through Bahrain untouched and walk away with a dominant 1-2 finish, their reputation as the masters of regulation will be cemented. Not just as champions of engineering, but as architects of timing. Once again, they'll have read the rulebook better than anyone. Played the game cleaner, sharper, and faster. But if the FIA clamps down after the first round, and Mercedes is forced to tear up its engine design, it could be one of the most dramatic regulatory backflips in modern Formula One. A collapse not just of performance, but of planning, months of simulation, and millions in R&D. That's not just a penalty, it's a knockout punch to a season before it's even begun. And this isn't a movie. There's no script. No guaranteed redemption arc. Only political pressure, engineering complexity, and the relentless truth of the stopwatch. Meanwhile, teams like Ferrari and Red Bull are watching closely, some might say nervously. Because if Mercedes keeps the trick, they'll be forced to chase it. Fast. And that means rushed updates, compromised reliability, and potential chaos in the early flyaway races. This isn't just about Bahrain. It's about the ripple effect across the entire championship. The biggest question no one can answer yet is this: did Mercedes go too far? Or did they simply go further than anyone else dared? Because in Formula One, there's always a difference between illegal and clever. And sometimes, that line isn't drawn by the rulebook but by what the FIA decides to tolerate. And if we've learned anything over the past decade, it's that dominance breeds controversy, and controversy drives regulation. So, let's end with this. If you were sitting at the FIA table right now, would you shut it down? Or let the season play out and risk a runaway championship? Your call. Because what happens next won't just define Mercedes. It could define the entire identity of F1's electric future.